07:42 a.m., April 22nd, 1945. Southern Okinawa, provisional detention area. The morning air carried the smell of crushed coral and diesel exhaust. American forces had secured this sector 3 weeks into the Okinawa campaign. Among the displaced civilians processed through temporary holding areas were 14 Japanese educators, separated from the general population under field orders that arrived without explanation. Sergeant First Class Robert Thompson of the 96th Infantry Division stood outside a canvas-walled enclosure where approximately 40 Japanese children, ages 4 to 12, sat in rows on packed earth. Their parents had been relocated to separate facilities pending status verification. The children stared at nothing. An operations officer arrived with a typed directive. The teachers would provide daily instruction to maintain order and prevent deterioration of juvenile morale. No curriculum specified, no duration given. Thompson watched as the first teacher, a woman in her 30s, picked up a piece of salvaged chalk. Her hand shook. The children did not look up. The directive made no strategic sense, but it carried a colonel's signature. April 22nd, 1945. The enclosure designated Camp 16 sat 2 miles behind the forward positions, close enough that artillery fire rattled the corrugated metal roofing. Sergeant Thompson had overseen the processing of over 300 civilians in the past week. This was different. Captain Howard Peterson, commanding the provisional garrison, had served 22 months in the Pacific Theater. His orders regarding the children came from division headquarters with unusual specificity. Maintain separation, ensure minimal interaction with regular internees, assign supervision to the detained educators. Peterson studied the teaching staff. Most were women, 2 older men. All wore civilian clothing stained with coral dust. Their identity papers listed schools in Naha and Shuri, both now contested zones. Thompson arranged the teachers in a semicircle. Through an interpreter, Peterson explained their assignment. They would conduct lessons, content unspecified, duration indefinite. Refusal was not discussed. One teacher, identified in camp records as Haruko Nishida, age 34, former instructor at Shuri Elementary, asked a question in Japanese. The interpreter translated, "What should we teach them?" Peterson glanced at Thompson. Neither man had an answer prepared. "Teach them what they need to know," Peterson said finally. The interpreter repeated it. Haruko's expression did not change. By 1,000 hours, the first session began. Haruko stood before the children with salvaged writing materials, chalk, a wooden board, scraps of paper. She wrote simple Japanese characters. The children copied them mechanically. Thompson observed from outside the enclosure. The scene felt wrong in a way he could not articulate. These were enemy nationals, but they were also children who had not eaten a full meal in days. Camp 16, late afternoon, April 22nd, 1945. The western light slanted through gaps in the canvas walls. Haruko Nishida sat on a wooden crate, her hands covered in chalk dust. She had taught elementary students for 11 years before the invasion. Her classroom in Shuri had been destroyed by naval bombardment on April 4th. She had evacuated with 19 students. Only 7 reached American lines. The others were lost in the chaos. Now she was instructed to teach children she did not know, under guard, with no clear purpose. An American private delivered rations, canned meat, crackers, water in canteens. The children ate in silence. Haruko did not eat. Her fellow teachers whispered among themselves, trying to understand the logic of their situation. One teacher, an older man named Takeshi Yamamoto, suggested they were being used for propaganda purposes. Another speculated they would be relocated to Saipan or Guam. Haruko said nothing. At 1700 hours, Thompson entered the enclosure. Through the interpreter, he asked Haruko if the children had been cooperative. She nodded. "Will you teach them English?" Thompson asked. The question hung in the air. Haruko's English was functional but limited. More importantly, teaching the enemy's language to Japanese children felt like a betrayal she could not justify. "I do not know enough English," she said through the interpreter. Thompson studied her. "You know more than they do." He left without waiting for a response. That evening, Haruko stared at the blank wooden board. She picked up the chalk and wrote a single English word. "Hello." Then she erased it. 2000 hours, April 22nd, 1945. The officer's tent reeked of cigarette smoke and mildew. Captain Peterson reviewed casualty reports from the day's operations. 14 wounded, 3 killed. The Okinawa campaign was projected to continue for another 60 to 90 days. Thompson entered and saluted. "The teachers aren't cooperating with the English instruction," Thompson said. Peterson lit another cigarette. "Did you expect them to?" "No, sir." "Neither did I." The directive regarding the children had come from a staff officer at 10th Army headquarters. No explanation accompanied it. Peterson had learned not to question illogical orders. The Pacific War produced situations that defied conventional military logic. Resources were scarce. Medical supplies prioritized combat units. Food stocks barely met demand. Dedicating personnel and materials to a provisional education program made no tactical sense. Yet the order stood. Thompson hesitated before speaking. "Sir, what's the purpose of this?" Peterson exhaled smoke. "Probably someone's idea of following Geneva Convention protocols. Keep the children occupied, prevent psychological deterioration, document that we're providing care." "Do we need documentation?" "Everything's documented now," Peterson said. "Every decision, every action. Assume someone will review it later and judge whether we followed proper procedures." Thompson thought about the children's hollow eyes. "And if the teachers refuse?" "They won't refuse," Peterson said quietly. "They have nowhere else to go." The tent fell silent except for the distant rumble of artillery. Peterson stubbed out his cigarette and returned to the casualty reports. Before Thompson left, Peterson spoke again. "Do you think they'll ever forgive us for this?" Thompson did not answer. The question seemed to require a clarity neither man possessed. April 24th, 1945. The camp's open courtyard measured approximately 40 meters square, bordered by wire fencing and guard posts. Morning temperatures reached 22 degrees Celsius. The children assembled in rows. Haruko had decided to comply. Resistance accomplished nothing. The children needed structure, and she could provide it, even under these circumstances. She began with basic English words: sun, water, ground. She pointed at objects and repeated the words. Most children remained silent. A few watched with detached curiosity. One boy, approximately 7 years old, listed in camp records as Taro Miyagi, repeated the word water after she said it. His pronunciation was clumsy, but earnest. Haruko repeated the word. Taro repeated it again, more clearly. It was a small breakthrough, but it registered. For the first time since arriving at the camp, Haruko felt something other than numbness. Several American soldiers observed from the perimeter. Thompson stood among them, arms crossed. He noticed the interaction between Haruko and the boy. Later that day, Thompson spoke with Peterson. "One of the kids is responding, starting to learn." Peterson nodded. "That's something." "Is it?" Thompson asked. "What happens when they leave here? They'll know a few English words and remember being prisoners." Peterson had no answer. The camp medical officer reported an outbreak of dysentery among the children that evening. 3 were placed in isolation. Resources to treat them were minimal: rehydration, salts, and observation. Thompson watched as Haruko requested permission to stay with the sick children. The request was denied. Security protocols required separation. That night, Thompson could not sleep. He kept thinking about Taro repeating the word water and the 3 children lying alone in a quarantine tent. April 24, 1945, late afternoon. Haruko learned from the interpreter that a transport was scheduled for April 26, destination unspecified. The manifest included adult male internees and potentially some of the children. Taro's name appeared on a preliminary list. Haruko had spent 2 days teaching him. It was an absurdly short time, but in the compressed reality of the camp, connections formed quickly. Taro had begun to trust her. He sat near her during meals. He volunteered to help distribute materials. The prospect of his removal created an unexpected crisis of purpose. Haruko realized she had unconsciously begun viewing the teaching assignment as something meaningful, a way to protect the children through knowledge and routine. She requested a meeting with Captain Peterson through the interpreter. Permission was granted. They met in the administrative tent. Peterson sat behind a field desk covered with reports and maps. "The boy, Taro Miyagi," Haruko said through the interpreter, "he should stay here. He is learning." Peterson's expression remained neutral. "Transport assignments are determined by processing requirements. I don't control the criteria." "He is a child," Haruko said. "They're all children," Peterson replied. The exchange lasted less than 3 minutes. Haruko returned to the enclosure, knowing the conversation had changed nothing. That evening she taught Taro the English words for stay, here, and safe. He repeated them carefully, unaware of their context. Thompson observed from a distance. He saw Haruko's face, the controlled desperation of someone trying to hold together something fragile. Later, Thompson approached Peterson. The teacher asked about the boy. "I know," Peterson said. "Are we really moving him?" Peterson looked at the transport manifest. For a moment his expression softened. Then he filed the papers without comment. April 25th, 1945. The command center occupied a reinforced tent with radio equipment and situation maps. Peterson received updated orders via encrypted dispatch. Accelerate processing of civilian internees to free resources for anticipated casualties from renewed offensive operations. The directive was clear. The provisional camps were temporary. Permanent facilities on Saipan and other rear area islands would handle long-term internment. Transport capacity was limited. Priority went to able-bodied adults who could be processed quickly. Children complicated the logistics. They required supervision and medical resources. The directive recommended consolidating juvenile internees into dedicated facilities. Camp 16 would be emptied within 10 days. Peterson called Thompson into the command center. "We're closing this camp. Everyone ships out by May 5th. Thompson absorbed the information. "Including the teachers?" "Everyone." "What about the teaching program?" Peterson glanced at the directive. The teaching program was never official policy. It was an interim measure to maintain order. Thompson chose his words carefully. "It's working. The kids are stable. Some are learning." "That's good," Peterson said. "But it's not the mission." Thompson understood. In the calculus of military operations, small human successes meant nothing against larger logistical realities. Outside, the sound of artillery intensified. The Okinawa campaign continued to consume resources at rates that exceeded pre-invasion estimates. Every tent, every ration, every transport slot had to be justified. Peterson stared at the situation map. Red markings indicated contested zones. Blue markings showed secured areas. The gap between them seemed impossibly small given the cost. "Do you ever wonder," Thompson said quietly, "if any of this will be remembered correctly?" Peterson did not look up from the map. "I wonder if any of it will be remembered at all." The radio crackled with a status update from forward units. Both men returned to their duties. April 26, 1945. The outdoor classroom operated under clear skies. Temperature climbed to 24 degrees Celsius by mid-morning. Rumors of an impending attack circulated among the guards. Unconfirmed reports of Japanese forces regrouping in the northern hills. The teachers sensed the shift in atmosphere. American soldiers moved with increased urgency. Supply trucks arrived and departed more frequently. The camp's perimeter was reinforced with additional wire. Haruko wrote English sentences on the wooden board. "This is water. This is food. This is sky." The children repeated the words mechanically. Their attention wavered. One of the teachers, a woman named Keiko Tanaka, whispered to Haruko during a break. "They are preparing to move us." Haruko had suspected as much. "Where?" "I do not know. Away from the fighting?" The irony was bitter. They were already away from the fighting, but the fighting followed them everywhere. At 1300 hours, a distant explosion shook the ground. The children flinched. Several began crying. Haruko moved among them, speaking in Japanese, trying to restore calm. Thompson appeared at the enclosure entrance. "Everyone stays inside until the all clear." The explosion had been an American artillery test, a routine occurrence but indistinguishable from incoming fire to untrained ears. Haruko resumed the lesson, but the words felt meaningless. "This is sky." The sky was the color of ash. "This is water." The water tasted of metal. "This is food." The food was rationed and unfamiliar. By evening, the children were exhausted. Haruko sat with them as they ate their rations. Taro sat beside her. He said in English, "Safe?" It was a question, not a statement. Haruko wanted to lie. She wanted to tell him everything would be safe. Instead, she nodded once, knowing the gesture was a promise she could not keep. April 26, 1945, evening. The teachers gathered in their assigned section of the camp. 15 people in a space designed for 10. They spoke in low voices, sharing fragments of information gathered from interpreters and overheard conversations. Yamamoto, the older teacher, believed they would be sent to Saipan. Another teacher thought Guam. No one knew with certainty. Haruko said little. Her thoughts remained with Taro and the other children. In 3 days, she had watched them transform slightly, less fearful, more responsive. The teaching had provided structure in chaos. Now that structure would dissolve. Keiko approached Haruko. "You care about that boy?" "I care about all of them," Haruko replied, "but especially him." Haruko did not deny it. "He reminds me of my students in Shuri, the ones who did not make it." Keiko sat beside her. "We cannot save them. We can only teach them what we can, while we can." "Is that enough?" "It has to be." Outside, guards changed shifts. The night air cooled rapidly. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was singing, a Japanese folk song, barely audible, one of the children perhaps. The song spoke of home and rivers and seasons that followed predictable patterns. Haruko listened until the singing stopped. At 2200 hours, the camp lights dimmed to conserve generator fuel. Haruko lay on her sleeping mat, staring at the canvas ceiling. She thought about the children's faces, the English words they had learned, the trust Taro had placed in her. She thought about betrayal, not the large betrayals of war and nations, but the small ones, being unable to promise safety, unable to prevent separation, unable to explain why the world had become incomprehensible. Tomorrow she would teach them more words. It was the only thing she could control. April 27th, 1945. Morning formation assembled at 0800 hours. The children stood in uneven rows, some barefoot, all wearing clothes provided by the American quartermaster. Oversized shirts and trousers that had to be rolled at the cuffs. Haruko began the day's lesson with numbers in English. 1, 2, 3. The children repeated. During a break, Taro approached Thompson, who stood near the enclosure fence. Through gestures and broken English, Taro attempted communication. Thompson crouched to the boy's level. "What is it?" Taro struggled to find words. Finally, he said in heavily accented English, "We are not enemies, we are children." The statement was simple. Its impact was not. Thompson stared at the boy. Around them, the normal sounds of the camp continued. Engines, voices, the clatter of equipment. But in that moment, Thompson heard only the child's words. He stood and walked to the command center without responding. Peterson was reviewing transport manifests. Thompson entered without saluting. "One of the kids just told me we're not enemies," Thompson said. Peterson looked up. "What?" "Taro, the boy the teacher's been working with. He said it in English. We are not enemies, we are children." Peterson set down the manifest. For several seconds, he said nothing. "He's right," Peterson said finally. "I know. But it doesn't change the orders." "I know that too." Peterson picked up his pen. His hand shook slightly as he wrote a note in his logbook. April 27, juvenile internee demonstrated English comprehension. Program appears effective but scheduled for termination per transport directive. The note would be filed with hundreds of other administrative records, most of which would never be reviewed. Thompson remained standing. "What do we do with that information?" Peterson closed the logbook. "We do our jobs." April 28, 1945. Thompson made a decision that violated protocol, but aligned with something deeper than regulation. He approached Peterson in the command center. "I want to delay the transport, keep the teachers here another week." Peterson looked at him. "On what grounds?" "The teaching program is producing measurable results. The children are stabilized. Moving them now would disrupt progress. The transport directive came from division. I can't override it without cause." "Then create cause," Thompson said. Peterson understood what Thompson was proposing, a deliberate administrative delay, the kind that happened routinely in military bureaucracy, but rarely by design. "If this gets flagged, we'll both face consequences," Peterson said. "I know." Peterson considered the risk. In the hierarchy of military infractions, delaying a civilian transport order ranked low, but it was still insubordination if discovered. He thought about Taro's statement. "We are not enemies. We are children." Peterson signed an amended transport request, citing incomplete medical clearances pending review as the delay reason. It was plausible enough to withstand casual scrutiny. The transport scheduled for April 30th would proceed without Camp 16's population. Thompson distributed the updated orders to the guards and administrative staff. No one questioned the change. When Haruko learned through the interpreter that the transport had been delayed, her expression shifted. Confusion, then relief, then something like gratitude. She asked Thompson through the interpreter. "Why?" Thompson had no answer that made sense in Japanese. He simply said, "Keep teaching." That afternoon, the lesson continued. Haruko taught the children to write their names in English. Each child carefully formed the letters of their own name on scraps of paper. Taro wrote his name and held it up for Thompson to see. Thompson nodded. The decision had been made. 7 days had been secured. What happened after that remained uncertain. April 30th, 1945, early morning. The camp prepared for a different kind of day. The transport had departed without them, but everyone understood this was a temporary reprieve. Haruko gathered the children for what she mentally termed essential lessons. She taught them basic phrases. I am hungry. I need help. Where is water? Survival language. The children practiced the phrases repeatedly. Their pronunciation improved. Some began to experiment, combining words in new ways. Taro asked in Japanese how to say mother. Haruko taught him mother. He repeated it softly as though testing the word's power to summon something lost. By midday, clouds gathered. Rain began at 1400 hours. Heavy, warm rain that turned the camp's coral paths to mud. The lesson moved inside the enclosure's covered section. Haruko taught them the English words for rain, cloud, storm. Thompson watched from the entrance, staying dry under a canvas overhang. He had bought them 7 days. 6 remained. Peterson arrived, rain darkening his uniform. He stood beside Thompson. The next transport is May 7th, Peterson said. Division confirmed it. No delays this time. Thompson nodded. You did a good thing, Peterson added. Even if it doesn't change the outcome. Does it matter if the outcome doesn't change? Peterson watched the children repeating English words after Haruko. It matters to them. Right now, that's enough. The rain continued through the evening. Haruko conducted the final lesson of the day by lamplight. She taught the children the word tomorrow. They repeated it. Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. When the lesson ended, Haruko remained in the enclosure long after the children had been escorted to their sleeping area. She stood in the rain, letting it wash the chalk dust from her hands. Thompson observed from a distance but did not interrupt. Some moments did not require witness. May 1st, 1945. The camp operated under clearing skies. Combat operations continued in the northern sectors, but Camp 16 existed in a pocket of relative quiet. Captain Peterson walked the perimeter at dawn. He had commanded provisional facilities before, temporary spaces where people waited to be moved elsewhere. None had stayed with him the way this one had. The teaching program had never been his idea. It had arrived as an administrative directive, probably conceived by a staff officer who never visited the front and never saw the children's faces. But something had emerged from that arbitrary order. The children had learned. The teachers had found purpose, and for a brief window, the machinery of war had accidentally created something human. Peterson reviewed his command log. Entries recorded routine matters, supply requisitions, personnel assignments, security reports. One entry stood out, written the day Taro spoke in English. He read it again. Program appears effective but scheduled for termination. Per transport directive. Effective. The word felt inadequate. Thompson approached. Morning, sir. Thompson. The kids are asking when they're leaving. Do they want to leave? I don't think they know what they want, Thompson said. They're just asking because they know it's coming. Peterson closed the log. 7 days. That's what we gave them. Was it enough? Nothing would have been enough. The two men stood in silence. Around them, the camp conducted its morning routines. Guards changing positions, kitchen staff preparing rations, the sound of children's voices carrying from the enclosure. Peterson thought about the war's archive, the reports and logs and photographs that would outlast everyone present. Future historians would sift through documents, constructing narratives from fragments. This small camp, these children, this teaching program, they would appear as footnotes if they appeared at all. The significance would be invisible. May 7th, 1946. Okinawa had been secured for 11 months. The island slowly transformed from battlefield to occupied territory. Reconstruction proceeded in measured stages. Haruko Nishida returned to Shuri in the spring. The city was unrecognizable. Entire blocks had been erased. The school where she taught for 11 years existed only in memory. She found temporary housing in a partially rebuilt neighborhood. Work was scarce. Food remained rationed. The occupation government provided basic services and enforced curfews. Haruko secured a position teaching at a provisional school established in a converted warehouse. Her students were Okinawan children, survivors like herself, trying to reconstruct normal life. She taught them Japanese language and mathematics. She did not teach them English. At night, she sometimes thought about Camp 16. The children's faces had blurred in memory, except for Taro. She wondered where the transport had taken him. Saipan, probably, or Guam. Maybe back to Japan once the war ended. She wondered if he remembered the English words she taught him. Water. Safe. Tomorrow. She wondered if any of it had mattered. One afternoon, a former colleague visited. They spoke about the war, the destruction, the difficulty of beginning again. "Do you regret anything?" the colleague asked. Haruko thought about the question carefully. Regret seemed too simple. The war had erased the context in which regret made sense. "I taught children during the war," she said. "I do not know if it helped them." "You did what you could." "Yes," Haruko said. "That is all anyone did." She sat by her window that evening, watching the sunset over rebuilt streets. Somewhere the children she taught for 7 days were living their lives. They were older now, they had survived. The lessons had been temporary, the survival was permanent. She did not know if they remembered her. Perhaps memory was not the point.